Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm your host, Manasi.
And I'm your other host, Cynthia.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Today, we'll be speaking to Matias Spinetta, who's the Global Vice President of Revenue Operations at Eightfold AI. Eightfold AI is a leading AI-native enterprise talent intelligence platform. Eightfold's technology is designed to help companies with all aspects of talent, including talent acquisition, talent management, upskilling, reskilling, and talent planning. Eightfold last raised $220 million in 2021 when it was valued at over $2 billion. Prior to joining Eightfold, Matias served as the Vice President of Worldwide Go-to-Market Strategy and Operations at Automation Anywhere, and also held leadership roles at Salesforce, Booz & Company, and Google. Matias is a fellow Wharton alum as he received his MBA from here. Matias, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So to get started, would love to spend some time understanding your educational and career background to start. Would love to hear a little bit. Prior to business school, you were focused on sales strategy and development at Google. What was that experience like? And are there any takeaways you'd share in regards to how the technology world sales ecosystem operates?
Yeah. Well, obviously, Google was my first work experience after undergrad. And by the way, if you are hearing an accent, it's because I am from Argentina originally. I was born and raised in Buenos Aires. When I was finishing undergrad, I saw this newspaper article about Google saying that they were going to be opening offices in Buenos Aires, their hub for Spanish-speaking Latin America. And if people were interested, they should send a resume to jobs@google.com. As someone who was going to be finishing college soon, I just sent my resume and they called me. To my surprise, they called me. And I went through their interview process. I got in without having any idea of what I was going to be doing. And something that is, I would say, interesting or important to acknowledge for people that are not from, let's say, very mature markets is that there aren't that many opportunities, right, to join companies like the caliber of Google, Meta, or any of these big tech players. So if you can get in, it doesn't matter what you're going to do, just try to get in, right? It was super interesting. The main role of the company, of the office, was to develop the Spanish-speaking Latin American market. My job early on, like in the first maybe 3 to 6 months, consisted of providing, let's say, support to existing customers. But then very quickly, I pivoted to sales and business development. So for the next 4 years, more or less, I continuously traveled from Buenos Aires to places like Peru, Chile, Panama, Colombia. And my goal was to meet with the largest companies that I could find and help them get onto AdWords, which is, at the time, that was how we called Google's advertising platform. And it was such an interesting experience because, first of all, there was no Google presence in any of those markets from a commercial perspective. Obviously, people use Google as a search engine, but there was no local presence from the company. And in addition to that, what I was trying to sell was a completely new product. At that point in time, internet penetration rates in Latin America were around 30%. I think Argentina was kind of at the forefront with maybe 45 to 50%, but it was still very, very low overall, right? Getting into a room with someone and convince them to put money onto something that felt so abstract as an online ad showing whenever you typed on Google was a challenge. Another challenge that I found very interesting was around building like a partner ecosystem. That was probably one of the most valuable early lessons that I got from my job at Google, right? It was a real challenge just landing on a completely new country, having no contacts whatsoever, and trying to open up business in that market, given the conditions that I mentioned earlier. So the way in which I particularly found helpful to scale my presence in these markets and accelerate my impact was to find local advertising agencies and partner with them. And the partnership was very straightforward. I would come in and say, all right, you know what? Online advertising is the future. This is what's coming. You don't want to miss this out. Why don't you give me access to your book of business and let's go sell together to your customers. And in doing so, I will help you build an online advertising business unit for your company. That was a way of doing business that was a win-win for both parties. So on the one hand, I would get access to important companies in every market. I would get introductions, an opportunity to pitch my product to decision makers. And on the other, my partners, they would build a new business unit or a new stream of revenue for them. That worked out very, very nicely. I would say that was probably one of the most rewarding experiences that I've had in the past 20 years. Even though I was very junior at the time, it was so much fun and there was so much excitement about helping Google land in a completely new market for them. So I had a great time overall.
Very interesting. And I'm curious, in regards to kind of the advertiser's book of business that you would then collaborate to add this technology for, do you notice any early adopters that tended to be concentrated in a certain sector? So maybe CPG companies or healthcare companies or tech-oriented companies. Asked differently, who were kind of the first adopters who were willing to take this on?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. So I would say, particularly when it comes to that industry, the early adopters were usually retail companies, simply because people would just search on Google whatever they wanted to buy. I remind you, this was like 2006 to 2009 or 10, right? Amazon wasn't there. Amazon wasn't an option. There were other local players that you could go in and buy stuff from, but Google was that window into just buying products online. I would say retailers were the early adopters of the time, followed by tech companies. CPG companies also, I would say they were also early adopters, more from a branding perspective than anything else. And it was interesting because also going back to your earlier question, now that you're making me think about it, a lesson that I learned was around being very scrappy. And in a way, scarcity drives innovation. Let me tell you what I mean by this. So today, and we're going to talk about my role later in this conversation, I think, but the way in which salespeople are supported today by processes, market data, systems and tools, I mean, it's incredibly sophisticated. 15, 20 years ago, in a developing economy, that wasn't the case at all. My way to find customers, I did say, hey, on the one hand, I did go into building these new partnerships with local agencies, but then on the other, I would just buy local newspapers and magazines. I would just see who was advertising, and then I would just call them because I knew that they had money to pay for advertising, right? So that was another interesting lesson that I got from that experience, like being very scrappy in whatever you do and finding just new ways to get to your goal. And yeah, that was another way to find people who would potentially be willing to invest, just looking into who was spending money at the time, regardless of whether they were mature or enough or not to jump onto the online advertising train.
Got it. Very helpful. After that role, you completed your MBA and then held roles at Booz & Co., as well as Salesforce and Automation Anywhere. I'm curious specifically around your strategy and operations work at Salesforce and Automation Anywhere. What trends were you noticing in regards to difficulties or challenges on business operations or go-to-market that these largely B2B focused tech companies were facing? Imagine they've kind of evolved over the years, but were there kind of 2 or 3 key issues you were helping them with?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, there's a difference of scale between, let's say, Salesforce and Automation Anywhere. There are different levels of maturity, different company sizes. But if I had to summarize some common challenges that both companies face from an operations or sales strategy perspective, is the ability to ensure that every go-to-market role is operating in a cohesive manner. Typically, you have different roles that are aligned to different stages of the customer lifecycle. So you have SDRs early on. These are the people who try to open up new opportunities, generate new business, new leads for sales. Then you have the account managers or account executives. They are the ones who try to close that customer, close that first deal, and then grow that account over time. Then you have customer success managers. They are the ones who will ensure that the customer is adopting the product properly. They're the ones who have to ensure that the customer is seeing value in the product, and they should act as this sort of trusted advisor to help them grow over time and make the most value out of the partnership between the vendor and the customer. Then you have roles that are more focused on renewals, making sure the renewals happen and take place. And depending on how difficult it is to renew a customer, the remit of the role will be a bit different, but that's another go-to-market role. Then in parallel to all these roles, you have the partner account managers, so the individuals who work with partners who help you do business with maybe joint customers, or maybe in the case of SaaS companies, these are people who will then go and implement a product, which, by the way, many tech companies have a professional services team as well. So that's another go-to-market role that has a say in all of this, right? the main common challenge that I see across tech companies is making sure that all these different roles are operating in such a way that from a customer perspective, the experience is seamless. It's very common to see issues when it comes to, let's say, handoffs between one role and the next, or when it comes to doing planning, for example. Maybe this is not happening anymore. And by the way, anything that I say here is just my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of any company. But one of the challenges that we had at Salesforce was that sales would do planning first, and they would come up with the goals that they had for the business. And then every other function would just run to kind of adapt to whatever sales was doing. That shouldn't really be the case. I mean, the way in which planning should work is should be a lot more integrated, right? I mean, sales, customer success, marketing, professional services, they should all be sitting together at the table and aligned cross-functionally from a planning point of view. So making sure that all these functions were working in a cohesive way is probably one of the biggest challenges that I've seen. And honestly, that's why I became so interested in the revenue operations function, because it is meant to drive that alignment across every go-to-market team.
Absolutely. And I really liked what you mentioned about the goal being ensuring a seamless customer experience. I think tech companies, when they start off at the startup stage, naturally, everyone is wearing a number of hats. But at some point when they have that growth phase, they'll start to think about building out a team that's focused on account management, maybe upsell or customer expansion, and of course, a dedicated outbound sales team. In your view, what is the right time for a tech company to ensure that all of those departments and functions are built out, and specifically creating a workforce that has dedicated heads to, say, account management, customer experience, and so forth?
Yeah, my perspective on this is that the moment you as a company decide to have a paying customer, somebody that's going to be giving you money in exchange for a product or a service, that will then enable them to execute on their own business processes. At that point in time, when you make that decision, that's when you should be pushing for this coherent end-to-end cross-functional way of working. Because, I mean, it's unfortunate whenever companies don't think in this way. And I get it, right? I mean, sometimes founders have a pressure to sell and meet targets that they had promised to the board of directors, who in many cases is composed by the VCs who are giving them funds to run the company and scale it. Being a founder is a very, 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 very challenging place to be in. But I can totally see how sometimes founders might focus a lot on the sales side, like growing that top line, and maybe not invest as much in other functions. And then what happens is that maybe you close a deal, you onboard the customer, but if the implementation doesn't go well, if the customer is not seeing value on your product, that is a losing proposition for both parties, not only for the customer, but also for you as a company. Because on the one hand, the customer that made a bet on you now is probably regretting that decision. The person who put their name on the line in front of their own CFO or in front of their own leadership team is also going to be having a really hard time justifying why they made the wrong decision. Who knows whether the company performance might be impacted by the fact that you didn't provide the service that you had promised. There's a lot of issues there. And then secondly, from a vendor perspective, it's never good to have customer churn. You have to be able to deliver on your promise and deliver the service and deliver on that promise, because otherwise, what ends up happening is that customers churn. And when customers churn, that's a signal to everyone else outside of your company. If customers churn, that means that your product is not sticky enough. That means that you won't be able to scale your product. That's something critical that you got to show to keep on growing your company. So onboarding new customers is equally as important as ensuring that your existing customers are super successful with your solution and that they can grow over time with you.
Great, thank you. Switching a little bit to Eightfold, I know we gave a brief summary at the beginning about the company and its goals, but would love to hear your view on Eightfold's core mission and focus, as well as whether it's evolved either since you joined or since the company's founding.
Yeah. Eightfold, as you mentioned earlier, was founded in 2016, and the company's mission hasn't changed since then. The mission was set by our co-founders, and it is to find the right career for everyone in the world. And that mission has stayed very, very consistent over time. I mean, at least from my perspective, it's one of the different aspects that attracted me to the company. I mean, it's a mission that resonates very well with me. I mean, as somebody who, just like any other Wharton MBA, who is very career-oriented, helping people find the right place for them in the market is critical. It's actually a fascinating topic, because if you think about it, right, I mean, employment is probably the backbone of any society, right? So if you are able to drive that society towards optimal employment, that is a very fulfilling thing to do. The mission hasn't changed and it's remained very stable. And that's what's guiding most of our most important decisions as a company.
Definitely. And in 2021, there was a really interesting Forbes article that touched on some of the key dynamics in the HR technology and services space. And they were largely focused on first, kind of the shift to skills-based hiring. Second, upskilling is being something that more and more employers and HR managers were focusing on. And then finally, how existing employees can be reskilled to maximize their retention and contributions to their org. Are you still seeing similar dynamics, similar trends today coming out of the pandemic, and especially with the current landscape of potentially more automation and more AI in all workflows?
I would say 100%. And I would even dare to say that these trends that you mentioned are becoming more and more widespread and even accelerating. I mean, if you think about it, there's different use cases across different industries. So let's take the example of, for example, let's say hospitals and nurses. The US has a shortage of nurses. What can you do to have enough nurses to deliver the services that you have to deliver as a hospital to your patients? Well, there's aspects of the job of a nurse that you don't have to be a nurse to do. So you can find people in the market who have that skill set to deliver on those aspects of the job without necessarily getting the certification for being a nurse. And therefore, you can have your nurses to focus on the activities that are critical for the patients. That's one example. Another example is, let's talk about maybe the oil and gas industry. Very interesting industry, but we all know that all these big players, they are little by little, like slowly shifting towards green energy. I mean, at some point, even though, let's say, the likes of Chevron or Exxon, or, I mean, you name it, right? Any large oil and gas company, they're all building out green energy options. And that is a massive shift when it comes to the skills, the knowledge their own people have. Can you go into the market and find 500,000 green energy engineers? I mean, no, that's pretty hard to do, right? I mean, there's not that many. So what do you do? Well, if you know who are your engineers today that have certain skills, you can infer their ability to learn other skills that are adjacent. So instead of going into the market and, let's say, letting a portion of your employees go and then hire new people, you can actually upskill, retrain, or reskill the people that you have in your company. Even in the tech industry, you have all seen the massive impact that generative AI has had overall. I mean, the job of a software engineer is going to change dramatically in the next few years. And you don't need to get new engineers. You can simply upskill the ones that you have today. So this notion of skills-based talent management or talent acquisition, I think, will remain for the foreseeable future. And the trends that we're experiencing as a society, they're so impactful in terms of the skill set that somebody has, that the notion of, let's say, job architecture, the notion of specific skills mapped to a specific role, that gets very old very quickly. You need a system that will enable you to understand how skills are changing for a particular role and how that role is going to look like in the near future so that you can better prepare for the future. And that's where a company like Eightfold brings a lot of value for our customers, because we do have that intelligence.
Sure. And on that note, in my previous role, we spent some time looking at what types of companies would adopt this skills-based approach, reskilling, upskilling first. And a lot of the time it was, large IT operations businesses, IT services, consultancies. And relatedly, we saw that Eightfold has launched a number of really exciting partnerships with companies like Udemy and Tata Consultancy Services. How does a team decide which kinds of partnerships to prioritize and where they see the most value for potential partnerships in the future?
Yeah, it is true that Eightfold has many, many partnerships. And the world of partnerships is, I would say it's very complex. And there's different types of partnerships, right? For example, maybe a month or two ago, we announced a partnership with LinkedIn, such that recruiters using Eightfold's talent acquisition product would have a much better experience using LinkedIn's, they call it the CRM Connect, which is basically the product that recruiters use in their sourcing candidates. Making these two systems talk better, be better integrated, results in a much, much, much better experience for the recruiter, because now they don't have to be in two different systems at the same time. They can be in one system and do everything in one go. So that is, I would say, one way to look at the partnerships, right? I mean, kind of partnership significantly increase the value for our shared customers. That's one example. We recently also signed a partnership with UKG, which is a very large HR tech company. They have thousands and thousands of customers. It's all about making sure that we can work together such that our capabilities can be added on top of their capabilities such that our shared customers get more value. Then there's other types of partnerships. There's partnerships with, for example, large GSIs like Deloitte or Accenture. These are the companies where we would partner together, and maybe they are the ones who end up implementing Eightfold onto the customers. So, and there's another partnership. This one is a bit more dated because it was probably one of the earlier partnerships that the company has. This one precedes me, but there's a company called Heidrick & Struggles. They're one of the largest executive recruiting firms in the world, and they have a product called the Heidrick Navigator, and that's powered by Eightfold's technology. I would say there's a lot of flavors in terms of partnerships that you can do, and something that I've been noticing is that the type of partnership that any company might be interested in at a given point in time really depends on where they are at in that maturity curve. Honestly, I have no idea whether we would entertain doing a partnership similar to the HNS partnership because we're heading to a different direction at this moment in time. But again, never say never. And as I said earlier, whatever I say, it's much as my opinion, right? So who knows what might happen.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I love how you touch on the breadth of partnerships that can exist. And we talked a lot about like different facets and trends within the HR tech and services industry. And I think one thing that we haven't touched on is there is a little bit of a slowdown in hiring across the country given the state of the economy. What I'm really curious about is, have you seen a shift in terms of what Eightfold's customers are approaching you guys for in terms of use cases and levers they're seeking to optimize? And can you shine some light on how the changing trends have also changed the customers' demands?
Yeah. Are we seeing, let's say, a reduction in new jobs in the economy? I'm not so sure about that. As a matter of fact, I think last week, the latest jobs report showed that the US had created like 300,000 jobs. That was like completely out of the charts for what people were expecting. I mean, it's hard for me to say whether like we're seeing a real reduction in jobs. At least the numbers don't indicate that. Having said that, it is true that there's a couple of trends that I'm noticing in our prospects and customers. One is HR teams are becoming a lot more sophisticated around the use of AI when it comes to the core processes that they have to run and own in a company. Talent acquisition and talent management being the two most important ones. And then when it comes to what prospects and customers are buying from Eightfold, right? I mean, it is true that our first product was talent acquisition. Last year, we saw a big uptick in interest around talent management. And now I think it's kind of similar. I think companies are interested in both. It really depends on the needs of the company at a given point in time. And usually, even though talent acquisition and talent management are processes owned by HR, the decision makers tend to be different. I mean, the person that manages talent acquisition is not always the person that also manages talent management. So I would say that we are seeing both, interest in both right now. And the problems that they are trying to solve, I mean, there is some commonality across different customers, across different industries. So for example, a very common issue that companies would like to solve is, okay, how can I optimize the productivity of my recruiters? How can I make my recruiters get talent into the company and convert that talent faster? That is a big, big problem for companies. By the way, when I was a hiring manager at a company like Salesforce, every time I open a role, I would get hundreds and hundreds of people applying for a role, right? And at that point in time, I had to go like resume by resume, one by one. And I had to make up my own decision around whether somebody was good or not. And I would spend, I'm not kidding you, I would spend maybe like 10 seconds in a resume. With a system, with a platform like Eightfold, that's the old way of doing things, because Eightfold will tell you, okay, from all the people that have applied for this job, based on how you have calibrated this role, these are the ones that are the best fit. So I can already start from the get-go looking into the most qualified candidates, which reduces the time to hire because we get into the funnel, the people that are the best qualified for that particular role. From a talent management perspective, I think internal mobility is something that companies are always concerned about. Retention is another big topic. And what we mentioned earlier in this call, like how can we actually reskill or upskill our existing workforce such that we can deliver the best experience for our employees? And to be quite frank, in the most cost-effective manner, because it is very expensive to pay severance. At least I think that a company like going through a reduction in force, I mean, that's not in the best interest of anyone. It's much better to reskill and upskill your existing people. And in doing so, you save a lot of money and a lot of pain.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, Eightfold kind of started in 2016 before the whole AI craze became a thing. And nowadays, every major company is starting to realize that systems can get so much more sophisticated. In your opinion, what do you think differentiates a company like Eightfold that's AI from day one versus some of the later players that are starting to try to catch up and build their own workflows with AI?
Yeah, that is an excellent question because, I mean, whenever a massive technological disruption happens, there's the companies that were there before, and then there's the companies that try to hop on the new wave of innovation, right? And that happens all the time. I mean, at least in my experience, a parallel that we can draw here is what happened when cloud became a real thing. Before companies like Salesforce or Workday became so prominent and popular, the usual way of selling software was, okay, I sell you my software, you install it on your servers. That's like the on-prem model, right? And then you had all these companies trying to do business on the cloud. And moving from being an on-prem company to a cloud company, that was a very difficult transition. Some of the largest tech companies in the world today that started as on-prem companies that now, they might be positioning themselves as cloud companies. What they don't tell you is that they still have thousands and thousands and thousands of customers on-prem. So making that transition is exceptionally difficult. And I see something similar happening with AI. One thing is building your company from the ground up with AI algorithms and finding an application, a commercial application for those algorithms. A very different thing is having a company today that is operating very successfully, but within a given technology, right? And then trying to retrofit that technology and make it more AI. So maybe for the people that might be listening to this that are not familiar with the tech space, because I did mention the cloud and on-prem, I mean, those are more like industry terms. Let's say that you have two companies. One builds electric cars, the other company builds regular cars. And then the older company says, all right, now we're an electric company and we're going to start retrofitting our cars to be electric. I mean, will they run on electricity? Yeah, most likely they're going to be successful making those cars run on electricity. Now, the big question is, will they deliver the same performance as those cars that were born as electric cars? That is the big difference that I see between native AI companies and other companies that are trying to catch up onto the AI wave.
Yeah, and in business school, we learned this concept of the innovator's dilemma, and I think there's a little bit of that happening as well. Curious on the debate of building vertical specific tools versus horizontal platforms. What is your view of the pros and cons of each? Or where do you think AI companies can win, horizontal or vertical?
I mean, I think they can win in both, to be honest with you, because AI, at least from my vantage point, is such a transformational technology that it can be applicable to anything. In the same way that cloud has affected every single industry, every single product, even before cloud, the internet itself, it's one of those things that impact pretty much every type of company out there, right? Now, when it comes to vertical applications versus horizontal, and this is my take, right? I mean, I think building a successful company that has this sort of horizontal application is super difficult. And I'm thinking, the company that I have in mind when I talk about this is OpenAI. Building a company like OpenAI, first of all, you should have been doing this for 10 years. And then secondly, the level of investment that you need to make that happen, I mean, it's just off the charts. Then when you look into a vertical application, and that's why I think our company is more like Eightfold, for example, it's also very difficult, but at least I think you have a very, very clear product market fit. So Eightfold very clearly sits at the intersection between HR and AI. And that's something that you can very easily explain and show value about to every company that you talk to. I think we're going to see a few very large horizontal companies like OpenAI in the AI space. And we're probably going to see a long tail of vertical application companies. And maybe with time, these verticalized companies, maybe we start seeing some consolidation in the near future because I mean, there's so much market that you can capture. That's how I feel about it. And then one topic that is kind of adjacent to this is, okay, so I'm a large company. Do I build or do I buy? And that's also a very common topic of discussion amongst large tech companies. And my take on this is that if I were a decision maker in a large tech company, I would opt for buying rather than building in-house. And let's take the example of Google. I mean, Google is not an Eightfold customer. It's close to my heart because I was a Googler for 6 years. So if Google had to build an internal solution to mimic what Eightfold does, that would be probably not the smartest decision in my opinion, because for a number of reasons. One is they're going to be dedicating engineering talent to build something that they will not be selling in the market later, right? Those are engineers that you could be repurposing for something that is more relevant to the way in which you make money in the market. So that's probably point number one. Point number two is it's not just about building the solution. Once you build it, you have to maintain it. You have to dedicate resources internally to maintain that solution that you developed in-house. Thirdly, not only do you have to maintain it, you have to keep up with the market because you have built it in-house, but then the market of these external tools is progressing as customers provide feedback to vendors. You have to keep up with the pace of innovation, and that's probably not going to be one of your top priorities. In the end, your own employees will end up living a lesser experience versus having purchased an external tool. The last point that I want to make is the value of all these. I mean, I'm talking about Eightfold as well as other AI applications, right? I mean, the value of the output that the system delivers is in the data. If you develop these systems in-house, you only have access to the data from your own employees. But if you purchase the service from a vendor that has access to other companies, the system is fed by information from all these different companies. So the information is much, much richer, which in theory would lead to much better outcomes. So that's why I would say, if I were a company of that scale, even though I could potentially build something, I wouldn't, because I don't think that would be the best use of the resources of the company.
Yeah, that's a super insightful comparison to think about build versus buy. I wanted for this very last section of the podcast, switch gears a little bit, because I think there are a lot of listeners of this podcast who either want to break into tech or are young professionals in the tech industry. And I know that many of us are super interested in joining this AI trend. So what skills do you think will be most valuable for those of us who are interested in joining an AI company, both for technical and non-technical roles based on your experience?
Yeah. Obviously, I'm more familiar with the non-technical side because I'm not in engineering, but let me start there anyways. I think what brings us back to the skills-based conversation, it's all about the skills that you're able to build, skills that you're able to demonstrate in the interview process. Somebody who wants to break into companies that are native AI companies, you got to do machine learning, for example. You got to be really good at that stuff. Machine learning, computer vision, pattern identification, anomaly detection, like all these things that we're asking the AI system to do that we just as human beings cannot do at scale. I know that somebody technical might be listening to me right now, maybe saying, this guy doesn't know what he's saying, and maybe you're right if you're that person. On the business side, that's a bit trickier, I would say. My take on this one is, I'm sure you heard like the phrase, people have to learn how to learn. So I think with AI is somewhat similar. You have to learn how to use AI products. You have to learn how to optimize your output and productivity by leveraging AI products. And let me give you one example from my company. So RFPs, a request for a proposal, is a very common way to buy software. We manage RFPs day in and day out. And a section of an RFP is a security section, like InfoSec. One challenge that my company had was, hey, we're getting all these RFPs and our compliance team is small and we just cannot cope with all the demand that we have. Something that one of my teams did was procure this tool that would use generative AI to automatically respond to the security section of the RFPs. That's just one example of how you can apply AI to a business problem and get an output that certainly helped a lot in our case. So I think if you're not in AI, I think it'd be good for you to start thinking about ways in which, or learn how to use AI to do whatever you do in a more productive way. Honestly, I don't think that, at least today, right? 2024, April 10th, I don't think that AI will come in and replace human beings. I just have a hard time seeing that in the near future, to be honest with you. But what I can certainly see is that when somebody understands how to leverage the technology, that person becomes significantly more productive and effective versus someone who doesn't. That's kind of the main piece of advice that I would give to anyone trying to break into these AI companies, showing that you have an aptitude to understand how to apply AI to your job.
Yeah, and what I love about that is it really goes to show the importance of upskilling and really updating your skills as the world evolves. So for this very last bit of the podcast, it's our tradition to ask a quick round of rapid fire questions.
Sure.
These are meant to be fun and whatever you think of the top of your head. Are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. First question, what is your favorite Bay Area coffee shop?
I don't have a favorite Bay Area coffee shop.
If you could have only one food for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
Sushi.
Okay, so sushi aside, if you had to pick between eating pizza or burgers, which one?
Pizza.
And then we couldn't end without a podcast-oriented question. So aside from Tech Talks, do you have a go-to podcast that's been your favorite?
One that I like is the one from the guy of Freakonomics. You can find it in Apple Podcasts. Just type Freakonomics and you will find it. It's pretty interesting. As a matter of fact, one of their shows was about cheating in academia, and they actually interviewed one Wharton professor, Joe Simmons. So that was one of my favorite professors, by the way. That was interesting.
Very cool. Thank you so much again for your time. This has been an incredibly insightful conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will be incredibly excited to hear your thoughts. So we really appreciate you joining.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. This was a very nice conversation, and good luck with graduation.
Thank you.
Thank you.